Thanks, sir.
Now, you're going to mask my name, or how's this going to work?
We could beep it out. I could even blur your face out if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Maybe I'll do it.
That's all right?
Yeah. All right, so we got Mr. here, and he told me an interesting story the other week about how he inadvertently took down a drug ring in the New York, New Jersey area while developing the Easy Pass technology is kind of what you've been working on. Tell us, first of all, everybody I think knows what the Easy Pass technology is. If you've driven through a metropolitan area, it's the little toll pass that lets you drive through without physically stopping and paying the toll. So tell us about that.
Well, first of all, I didn't single-handedly take anybody down. I haphazardly walked into...
Inadvertently
and haphazardly worked myself into a visual scenario that didn't make sense to me. And as it turned out, there was drug dealing involved.
Because you're an engineer.
No, I worked with a whole bunch of engineers. I'm actually technology as a background, information technology. So with computers. So my job was to do the brick and mortar on what normally would be computer technology, pure computer technology. And there weren't too many brick and mortar people around. And so the Easy Pass, I would consider brick and mortar only because it consists of RFID technology, radio frequency identification, which originated with airplanes, friend or foe, signals back and forth, and subsequently adapted to tracking cattle, and then subsequently modified to track people. Or I should say vehicles rather than people, because there are personal security issues involved and everything. So the RFID technology basically enables the capture of a serial number associated with a transponder that's attached to a vehicle. Now, transponders are attached to airplanes. And so the technology is a very typical crossover technology.
So I think, everybody's familiar with the RFID technology. You think of it now as, you even hear of it like technologies that are inserted under the skin. There's all sorts of sci-fi stuff that comes along with that. But with what you were helping develop was specifically was it specifically for the toll system, or was it
It was specifically for the toll system, but we were right at the forefront of it. And the challenging part was, well, if they could track cattle, what could we possibly do with it to ease congestion in a metropolitan area? And it became pretty obvious that if we adapted the technology correctly, safeguarding people's personal identification and privacy matters, which was a big concern at the time, we could probably help ease congestion traffic in greater New York, New Jersey metropolitan area. And that was really the thrust of it.
So that was the idea. And then what aspect did you help develop? You're like a software engineer?
Yeah, my background is really analysis, systems development, developing applications. Well, this was more than just doing that, because there was, when I say brick and mortar, we had to put loops into the ground, bury them into the ground a couple of inches below, seal them properly, put up devices that could actually read the transponder. Then the software would take that information read from the transponder together with the myriad of other transponders, because you can imagine congestion, separate them so that we could then identify which lane the person might have been in, the speed at which they were traveling, and we were only tracking speed for our own purposes, not to issue tickets, because we're not allowed to issue tickets. And somebody who didn't have a transponder, who somehow found themselves in a vehicle lane that required the payment of tolls, we would know that that would become a violation. And so we had to be able to take photographic images of license plates associated with the car, but we had to make sure that the images of the driver and none of the passengers was included in the image, because that would negate legally the use of that image.
So that was just a verification component to it, but does that necessarily, is that a basis of the technology, but the overall system?
It was a basis of technology because the concern for security was so high and personal. The inability to really track personal identification for people was really paramount back in those days. And that was, in the early days of technology. So our role with the photograph, if we didn't have the photographic evidence, we couldn't pursue the violators. We needed the photographic evidence. And so, but the photographic evidence really has nothing to do with computer technology.
Right.
So we had to marry that, and that's where the brick and mortar comes in. Marry the technologies into something that was meaningful and worthwhile and pursuable legally. So we had to pass legislation. We had to run campaigns so that the traveling public could really understand what we were doing. We were not interested in tracking them. We were interested in making sure that congestion could be eased at points where people would stop to pay their tolls, which was basically a way of money being exchanged. So we were able to reduce the exchange of money and instead capture a transaction with a transponder. Theoretically, I hope that wasn't my car. Theoretically, we could capture that transaction at about 105 miles per hour.
Wow.
But we don't recommend that anybody would go through a traffic lane or a toll plaza at that speed.
So now everybody, I think, appreciates the system because of the ease of use and the expedited service get through the tolls. You had mentioned there was some problems to solve until you've kind of like finally cracked the code. What were those problems in finally getting it over the finish line and as a usable service and product?
Well, the problems were actually many. First of all, doing live work in a live traffic situation was pretty nasty. Most of the work we had to do was at night. The problems that we ran into was differentiating each of the cars relative to the lanes that they were in and whether or not they were they lawfully paid their tolls or attempted to violate, because people would also cross over lanes right at the point of the transaction. And so we had to make sure that we got the right vehicle at the right moment, making sure that vehicle had a valid transponder. Some transponders weren't valid. People would literally create a transponder from cardboard boxes and paint them to make it look like it was a transponder, but there was nothing inside. And so visually, it looks like somebody's got something, but that something turns out to be nothing.
They thought they had it all figured out, huh? I'll just pay it.
Yeah, and one of the tricks for the truck drivers would be that in the cases of truck driving and trucks, the license plate would typically be on the rear of the vehicle instead of the front. It's very often what happened with a privately owned vehicle. And they developed a device that would allow for the license plate to flip right at the point where the transaction would be executed. And so you'd have a truck going through, let's say, George Washington Bridge, which at the time, and I'm making up the dollar amount, but it was roughly $26 for a truck. Let's say a four-axle truck to go through. Right at the point where the transaction would be captured, they would push a button, the license plate would drop so that the camera would not pick up a license plate number, and the vehicle would go through. Now, we captured the image of the vehicle, and we would do then stakeouts later on because we knew that these truck drivers, This was a normal route for them. They would go back and forth. So we would, for purposes of preventing further toll evasions, make sure the police presence was there. Police did not like to pursue toll violators. Why? It's not illegal. It's simply our inability to collect a toll, which doesn't constitute an illegality.
Right. You weren't there to take the money, so
correct.
It's not my fault.
Tough on you. And so eventually we figured out what the routes would be when a truck would probably come by. Police presence was there, and that was done with a purpose. We wanted the other travelers to basically see police stopping a vehicle due to non-payment of tolls or perceived non-payment of tolls.
So basically, you're trying to problem solve for a bunch of wise guys that were coming up with various shenanigans to get out of.
All the time, yeah, including putting electric tape on their license plate numbers to mask the actual number, to modify the license plate number. We figured out most of those schemes over time. But that was the culprit in the vehicles. But then we had to also overcome the technology issues. Certain cars were, frankly, difficult to read a transponder. They had windshields that had devices in them that would make de-icing easier. And that caused a transponder to basically be shielded from being read correctly. So we had to figure out places in the windshield where the transponder would go and work with the car manufacturers so that they would leave a window in the windshield that would allow for a proper RFID transmittal to be picked up.
So I know there's different options when you buy the tag. I've seen some that were boxes.
Yeah, no, it's been a while for me. So.
Yeah, but I mean, there's like the boxes, and then the one we have is just a sticker. And then now the box has some sort of electronical device in it.
The box has electronics inside. It's usually the more expensive version. The sticker is fine. The sticker, you can't do 105 mile per hour transaction on it, but with the box, you can. And also with the box, you have various other options that the sticker really doesn't allow. So as an example, if I were with the police or some kind of law enforcement agency, I don't think anybody would expect me to pay a toll as I went through one of my own agency toll booths. And so we would create transponders that were designated as non-revenue transponders. And designating it as non-revenue transponders would mean that in the back office, when the computer did the processing, we would eliminate the invoicing or the calculation of the toll. In addition to that, each of the transponders would have the vehicle classification embedded in it. So we knew that for a 2-axle vehicle, it would be a certain toll amount. For a 4-axle vehicle, it would be a higher toll amount. For a 6-axle vehicle, even higher. So one of the things that we had to do is to make sure that a 6-axle vehicle driver didn't get it into his or her head to use a 2-axle vehicle transponder. And so we would have axle counting that took place real time in the lanes and compared to what is on a transponder. And so we would know there was an anomaly that took place. Now, we didn't pursue immediately, but we would record that event and eventually track down that vehicle and eventually track down the misuse of the transponder to avoid paying the proper tolls.
So there's still, I wouldn't call it a good faith system, but everybody kind of knows that if you get out of it, there could be repercussions. And are people still trying to do workarounds?
Oh, sure. It's human nature to try to do the workarounds. And, we worked very carefully with the court systems. The judges didn't particularly like to hear these cases because it wasn't really an illegality. It was the avoidance of paying a toll. And so one of the mechanisms that we had to develop was fines that would come as a result of a judge finding that the driver purposely did something. And those fines, a certain portion of it then would have to go to the jurisdiction in which the infraction took place. That seemed to have eliminated much of the opposition to pursuing these characters and taking them to court, because there were court costs involved. And so it would be expensive for a township to really process that. And the court events would take place in the townships in which the violation took place.
I remember I was in Miami and there was a express lane, and I had found myself in the express lane, and I was in a rental car.
Right.
And I said, "Oh boy, I'm not supposed." And then of course the barriers go up, and then I didn't have. There's no toll to pay.
Right.
And so I assumed I would have got a ticket. How does one get a ticket in that scenario when you're in a rental car, you're in an out-of-town situation? I did not seem to get a ticket.
Visual observation by a patrol car, a vehicle parked on the side that may or may not radio a car ahead with the description and license plate number of the vehicle, in which case a pursuit would take place and you would be pulled over. There's no automatic way of doing it. We would probably take images if we didn't detect a proper transponder with the proper coding in it. But the other mechanism would be a pursuit by police, which again they didn't particularly like to do, and you'd get pulled over.
And so, does it go? They get your license tag, so they had the visual picture of you, of the violator.
Correct.
And then
which was needed in a court action.
And that
without that,
pursued.
you couldn't pursue.
Right. So that would probably they register. Oh, this is a rental car. Then they would contact the rental agency.
We would know ahead of time. The transponders would be secured by the rental agency. We wouldn't know who the driver was. We didn't expect the rental agency to pay us the violation.
Right.
So the notification of the infraction would be sent to the violation agency. Would be sent to the rental agency. They, in turn, through clerical process, would determine to whom that vehicle was rented, and they would then pursue. Because we were not really in a pursuit business. That wasn't the business we were in. We're in the business of getting traffic moving through highly congested areas and making sure that the proper tolls are paid.
How does the Easy Pass business make the money? Is it a licensing thing, or is it a per
we
toll?
We didn't make money at all. We could have, we should have. It's basically a compendium of a whole bunch of governmental agencies that operate toll roads. We had to develop agreements amongst us, rules of the road, so to speak, and those rules had to be followed. And new agencies who might want to join had to meet certain minimum requirements. We had to make sure that their technology was up to snuff, that their pursuit of violators was up to snuff, because a perceived lack of above-board treatment of people in one agency would reflect on another agency. So we had to create processes, agreements, in such a manner so that universally in the United States, at least in the Northeast at the time, all the rules would be universally understood.
Another instance, I remember getting a ticket in the mail for a violation, and it took the tag, but the tag it went to my address, and I believe it was my name, but it was not my vehicle. It was a van, and it was some...
Yes.
What might have happened in that situation?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges. The photos got mixed up. Simple as that. The vehicle could have crossed over in a lane. The wrong transaction event would have been associated with the photographic evidence, and that happens. Usually before that notification is sent out through the mails, there's a back office process that takes place. And every one of those events is manually checked by a clerk who looks at the image, looks at the transponder, makes sure that the number of axles appears to be right, that the vehicle classification that's on a transponder actually matches the image, but that's a human process. And so there was a failure in the human process.
So there's still a lot of groundwork that needs to be done in the implementation of this technology. I guess everybody, or at least I assumed that it was some all-seeing eye, and then there's no way out of it. It's a computer.
Well, that groundwork has really been done, but that would be a human error, and it happens very infrequently. Unfortunately, you were hit with one of those events, so you would think perhaps it's worldwide, universal, but it's not. It's actually a fairly rare event because, believe me, we get to hear about it because the people that get these notices in the mail feel put upon if something is incorrect, and they call the newspapers, and newspapers run stories, and we don't like those stories to be run. And so we had to do everything we could to make sure that those events were kept to an absolute minimum.
So it sounds like there was no real breakthrough moment that kind of put this technology over the finish line. Is just a bunch of problem solving as you went, or was there a particular moment that it kind of everything's it clicked and tied together?
Yes. Running scenarios in a laboratory was basically our testing grounds. As I mentioned before, the technology was first adapted to tracking cattle and other animals that were being mass moved in trucks and cars and railroad cars, origin and destination. And so we, over time, adapted the technology to really adapt it to privacy issues having to do with real people, having to do with real dollar concerns, having to do with speed, having to do with the type of vehicle they were driving, where they were driving it, and were they legitimately in possession of a transponder or not. We finally got to a point where we initially were using toll collectors in the toll lane to collect the manual tolls for people who would not sign up for Easy Pass. Getting people to sign up for Easy Pass in the beginning was a daunting task. People did not want to do it. The reason they didn't want to do it is because the account had to be funded ahead of time. A certain amount had to be in the Easy Pass account. Now, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't afford to pre-fund an account like that when you're used to just paying on a per transaction.
You're used to scrounging around for the coins.
Exactly. And so there was a public relations campaign that, yes, you had to pre-fund the account, but we try to keep it to a bare minimum. It was around $25, maybe $24, something like that, for a typical toll that might be $3 or $4. And when the account was nearing zero, before it hit zero, we would notify the customer that your account is, getting a little below the threshold. You need to replenish. So we were fighting that battle, a constant battle of accounts that were good, but it went to negative or zero. What do you do with those people? Because they seem to be good folks. So the ugly truth is, for an Easy Pass account that had some history behind it, where the account was not replenished on a timely enough basis, it would very often go into the negative, and we would not pursue. Not until it hit negative $15. And it was at that point that we figured out, okay, the person is either trying to avoid replenishing the account, has skipped town, or never intends to pay their dues, and we would take a different follow-up procedure under those circumstances.
Interesting. And so what was that moment that everything did click?
Yes, that moment in a laboratory. that's kind of where I come in. The laboratory testing appeared to be going okay. It appeared the technology was working, even though the agreements and the contracts were not in place. So you can prove the technology, but you don't have the operating mechanism to actually make it work hour by hour, day by day. And so they needed, the agency that started, the first agency that started, they needed a person who understood the brick and mortar aspect of it, who really understood the political aspects, who really understood the human equation, to actually take that laboratory tested technology and literally go live with it. So as an example, on the George Washington Bridge, we went live at midnight. And we pretty much knew the way the system would work, but we didn't really know until it actually worked. You know, one of the nasty points was I happened to be on a bridge on a upper level. We tested everything looked fine. It's before midnight. We had electricians crawling up in the girders, and then suddenly nothing would work. And the aha moment came in. Oh my God, what happened? Was there a failure in the technology? Did somebody cut a wire? And so you say to yourself, well, what's the last thing that was done? Oh, an electrician was crawling up through the girder. That must be it. And the electrician basically unwittingly uncoupled an electrical line. Once it was reconnected, everything was fine.
Wow. And it was it not on the George Washington Bridge in New York City there where you started to implement the camera system which would eventually lead to the inadvertent drug ring bust?
You're being very diplomatic. Yes. It wasn't the first one in our agency that went live, but it was certainly one of the big events with the greatest traffic and the greatest revenue flow. And so even though we went live and a system appeared to be working and the auditors said it was working, the inspector general, who was also overseeing in his own way, said it was working. People like myself wanted to make sure, again and again and again, belt and suspenders approach. And so my team and I developed the idea of why don't we capture an image of the vehicles coming into the toll plaza, unbeknownst to the vehicle drivers, knowing we were capturing the images, and double check against what was actually being captured in the transaction, just to make sure that everything was fine. We couldn't do that because of the labor relation laws and unions. We weren't allowed to take images of vehicles going through the lanes. But we also didn't accept that as an answer. And so we've tried to figure out a way where we could do that without being in complete violation of the labor laws. And so we decided to set up what's known as a blind. I won't get into explaining a blind unless you want to do that.
A box that covers
A
it,
box,
so it kind of obscures.
With a little hole in it.
Right.
The little hole would have the camera in it, and the camera would capture the vehicles going through the lanes. Actually, the camera angle would capture a whole bunch of lanes, and then you had the registry in each of the toll plazas. Let's say in one plaza you had up to 13 different cash registers. Now, the job of the toll collector was, we had nothing to do with the cash collections. We kept that totally separate. So the toll collectors, for the most part, could handle the cash And that really was none of our concern. Our concern was those vehicles that weren't paying in cash, they were supposed to be paying electronically. How would the toll collector, if at all, process that transaction on a toll registry device? Because one of the things we wanted them to do was to verify that the number of axles matched what our loops were capturing, that the number of axles that they saw would match what the system captured, and the number of axles that they saw matched the type of vehicle that was going through.
They were inadvertently helping you work on your project. They didn't know. They didn't know, but they were helping gather data to verify.
Well, we didn't do that because of that. We did it, again, because of the belt and suspenders approach. You want to make sure everything works right.
Sure.
Okay, you don't want to take any risks.
Guys, cross your T's, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And so they were doing that. Now, some toll collectors waited until 10 cars went through before they entered in the information. Toll collectors were supposed to do it one vehicle at a time. But sometimes the traffic would be so heavy, they couldn't do that. So they waited for a pause in the traffic in order to be able to do that. And so we were taking images. My team, and only my team, met in a control room, and we were watching the images, and we were looking at the electronic capture of the cash register and whether it was an easy pass event or not. And we noticed some anomalies. We noticed that a vehicle would go up to a toll plaza, up to a toll lane. A hand would be extended as if cash were being paid, but no cash was being entered into the machine. And the car wasn't an easy pass vehicle. So how can that be? Why would a vehicle go into a toll plaza lane, extend a hand as if providing money to a toll collector? Toll collector would not be entering that cash transaction, but the system also would not be picking up that it was an easy pass transaction. And so the conclusion that we reached as a team watching this image was we deployed a system that didn't work.
You assumed that everybody was doing everything they should be doing, and aside from human error.
Sure, but there appeared to be a gap. Something was...
Right, so an unknown variable.
Something was really wrong. And so the sweat factor came in. We said, okay, this is the end of our collective careers.
And you didn't have any answers for it at this time.
We had no answers at all.
So you couldn't explain it, or you didn't even know what to fix at this point.
It didn't make sense at all. It didn't make sense. It didn't happen in every event, but it happened every now and again. Enough to ask the question, what the heck is going on? And so I was the head of that project. And I had the unpleasant duty, while in the control room, of making the decision to call the Inspector General and say, I'm terribly sorry, but it looks like there's a defect in the system. Well, how do you know there's a defect? The Inspector General said. And I explained the situation. The Inspector General then said, well, how often does it happen? Every now and again. It doesn't happen very often, but it's a defect in the system. Where are you? Gave the location of where we were. Who's with you? I explained that only my team and my team alone was there. He said, how many people know what you're doing? I said, just the team members. Hang on, we'll be right there. Now, I expected that we would be fired on the spot when the Inspector General showed up. Instead, the Inspector General showed up with armed police officers who were part of the Inspector General's office, and they had various pieces of equipment. I was then taken to the Inspector General's office. My team was told to keep their mouth shut. And it was explained to me that the Inspector General's office had been in the process of what they call shopping.
Oh.
Now, when an Inspector General and his team shops, that means they're looking for something. And so they would be in their own cars going through toll plazas and handing money, shortchanging the toll collector or not shortchanging the toll collector, or paying more than they had to just to see what was going on. So the Inspector General explained to me that it does not appear to be a gap in the system or a defect in the system. It appears that something other than the obvious is going on. And somebody is selling an illicit substance in that transaction. And because the hand is cuffed, the fingers are cuffed, it's hard to tell what's passing through. As it turned out, in the end, drug dealing was going on in the toll plazas. And what happened was people were buying drugs from some of the toll collectors who were, not all toll collectors, some of them. And the hand that was going through, yes, it did have money in it. So money would be provided to the toll collector. The toll collector would provide the substance. The substance would go back into the vehicle through a cuffed hand, and the transaction would be completed. But it wasn't an easy pass transaction.
To be clear.
To be clear, right. And so that was the first photographic evidence that was ever taken of illicit transactions going through. As I remember it, I think going through several locations, approximately 17 toll collectors were brought up on charges by the district attorney's office, the state, for drug trafficking. A dead giveaway, which nobody really picked up on, but it was just a curiosity at the time, were the Mercedes-Benz that were parked in the toll collector's parking lot. No one apparently asked, well, a toll collector doing with a valuable car like that. But that then became one of the things going forward that the police and the Inspector General would be looking at, telltale evidence of something that just doesn't look right.
So it seemed like the Inspector General had a suspicion even before including you in on the conversation that there might be a little bit of illicit activity going on.
Absolutely. A suspicion, but no evidence at all. And that evidence apparently became evidence that was used in a court of law, photographic evidence and video evidence.
Which kind of verified that your technology worked in some ways.
It did, but it was a terrifying moment for myself and my staff because when we eventually figured out what was going on, because we didn't know how high up this went.
This wasn't on the side for these guys. It was part of a larger operation.
Exactly. And you know, my team members, they were mostly married men and women with children who didn't want to be involved in any of this. It wasn't their doing. They don't want any credit for anything. They wanted to just shy away and keep their jobs because they had mortgages to pay. And so there were very few of us that actually got subsequently involved.
You had to be because you're representing in a court of law kind of thing? Or how did you?
We didn't have to testify other than to the technology and that the technology works. We had to present to the judge evidence that technology works. And so part of that evidence was that the technology worked even to the point of the illicit transaction being captured on video. And that versus every other transaction, did it add up to 100? Did it all add up and make sense, or were there still gaps? And that's what we had to prove. And everything actually came together, added up There were no anomalies after all of the exclusions were taken into account.
Once you identified that missing variable, then it was the kind of key that picked the lock to kind of verify that it all actually worked.
Exactly. And there were tough moments. Some people were emotionally upset, again, because we didn't know how high it went. We didn't know who might have been involved. I was pretty sure none of my team members were involved, but you couldn't be certain.
And this is going, what year was this? Back 80s, 90s?
This was around 1996, 1997, in the early days. And the other concern, of course, was if the public were to find out, and eventually they did, what would their reaction be? And would they turn against the technology?
Right.
Or would they say, oh, okay, well, the technology appears to work. I feel so much better about paying $3 for a tow.
Yeah. And what do you know what was being sold? Was it like marijuana, cocaine, or is it
heavy drugs?
Stuff?
Yeah, heavy drugs. These people were all jailed. None of them were fined. They all went to long prison terms. So the police, that included state police, broke into the lockers, and some of these folks had tens of thousands of dollars in cash inside their lockers. Wow. In addition to mortgages that were being applied for, houses that were being purchased, additional cars that were being purchased, all of that came to an end.
Wow. And there's probably warehouses full of exotic cars and all that kind of stuff.
Could have been. We never did find out. But members of my team, they survived. I survived.
And but you had some threats to your life and things like that. Did you have any?
Yes.
Wow. Incredible.
Yeah, some of us were threatened. Yes. So, it's at that point in your life where you have to decide who are you and what are you, and are you going to allow the threats to stop what you believe in, or are you just going to cave into the threats and basically stop doing what you're doing? So those that wanted to bow out, bowed out. Those that didn't, we stayed with the program and saw it through completion until it became basically one of the largest toll collection systems in the world.
Yeah, and it's used for other things since then, right? I mean, they're probably still tracking cattle, but with that technology.
Yeah, that's old technology.
But then to get, automatic gate openers and things like that.
Right. We got it to a point where certain toll facilities became express toll facilities, where you didn't have a single toll collector. At least for me, one of the unexpected results were that the toll collectors, for the most part, lost their jobs. And I frankly didn't anticipate that. I just thought that the EasyPass technology would be a supplement to the existing manual collection. It turned out to be a replacement for the manual collection. And you still have a certain percentage of people, and I don't know what that percentage is, it's fairly low, that continue to pay cash, and they will never go on EasyPass. Especially if you're like a day laborer or something like that, you can't afford to fund an account, but you can afford maybe to pay the toll. And so you would prefer to have the cash in your pocket rather than in an account. Earning interest. The fear was always that somebody is earning interest in our money. Where's the money in the account? Who's getting that interest? It wasn't earning interest. The interest was de minimis. And it would be used to pay for the technology, further research.
This goes back to the human side of it, and so one of your big concerns was you didn't want to be disruptive to people's livelihood and their enjoyment. So but it's unintended consequences that you couldn't foresee, like the drug bust. But you also cared about people's routines and what they like, and the social aspects of going through the toll and things like that.
Well, you mentioned something really interesting. We would take surveys of people, surveys would take place at the toll plazas. And we were always, always curious why people would not go on Easy Pass, or why they would choose to pay manually. And even vehicles that had Easy Pass, they would go through a lane that could do either Easy Pass or manual toll collection. And one of the things we found out was that for a certain segment of the traveling public, the ability that morning or that evening to say hello, how are you, to another human being was important.
Mm-hmm.
And so we didn't realize really that aspect of it, or at least I didn't. And at first I thought, well, isn't that a little silly? And the more I thought about it, I thought the less silly it was. It's important for people to have that human touch with another human being. And it's a toll collector you don't know, chances are you'll never see again. But as it turned out, certain drivers would go to certain lanes knowing where certain toll collectors would be.
Hey, Joe, you're back again.
Exactly.
It's Friday. Don't worry about it, buddy. We got the game on Sunday.
Right, and that was an important aspect to their lives. And now I'm only sorry we weren't able to sell coffee or give coffee away in the toll plazas and donuts.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Well, even the hand-eye coordination with the baskets that you had to throw in the quarters as you went.
well, interesting. Yeah, with the baskets, you talk about the human nature. Those baskets, for the most part, they worked, except on the Garden State Parkway. They were in New Jersey. They were the ones that basically had the myriad of baskets. And so what the local thieves would do would be they would come out of their houses and literally sprint across the toll lanes and put plastic down inside of the basket.
Mm.
And so cars would go through, throw in their change. The change would not go into the change collector.
Mm-hmm.
It would go into a plastic bed that was created. And maybe an hour later, 2 hours later, and all these cars would be violators, quote unquote, because no money would go through. And they will come, wrap up the plastic, and run off with the toll monies. And so when it came to the baskets, we had to develop rules and regulations and processes not to go after people whose money didn't really get accounted for.
Mm-hmm.
I won't get into the details of what we did, but we didn't send out violation notices.
Yeah. Wow.
There were too many instances of.
So, what might you, and I know you're kind of out of the game now, but what, and later on, were the new innovations on people trying to do workarounds to get through the toll?
Well, as I mentioned, people would fabricate transponders. People would, and they weren't real transponders, they were cardboard boxes of plastic. They would switch a higher transponder with a lower transponder, trying to avoid paying the axle fee that was associated with the proper vehicle. Some people believe that, well, there's no way they're going to catch me one way or another. So they would just simply violate for the sake of violating. So we had to develop processes and procedures for tracking those kind of events, creating a calendar of when police could be used in the pursuit of these people, when these people would be in the lanes, a spotter vehicle being downline, announcing when a vehicle was spotted that was a probable suspect, and police chases would take place, vehicles would be pulled over. But we wanted to make sure that all of that was done within the visual vision of other travelers. Other travelers needed to see the violators were being pursued because other travelers might have been under the impression that you could cheat and get away with it. And that was an important aspect, that people knew that actual actions were being taken against violators. And actually, rather than being scorned, as good drivers were passing through, they would very often give a thumbs up when they saw police activity and drivers being pulled over.
So it's a fringe minority that is the unscrupulous types.
Oh, very fringe, very fringe. Yeah, and you know, for the most part, people are really good. They're really nice. They're really understanding. I would say the biggest challenge that we had was overcoming the privacy issue at the beginning, and also the decision by people to fund an account. Again, they didn't want to part with that money to fund $25 into an account. That was hard for some people, especially those who were living paycheck to paycheck. But eventually, I think most people figured out that it's in their best interest that keeps traffic moving and et cetera, and we were able to really account for all the revenues that we should have collected.
Has any of the Easy Pass technology, I know it's does not have the RFID aspect of it, but a lot of the intersections that have the camera that will take the picture license plate if you run a red light. Do you know anything about that, or is that affiliated in any way? Unfortunately.
I do. The vendors that basically provided the photographic technology for violators were also the vendors that did the red light technology. We were not involved in a red light. We'll never be involved in a red light. I would say the red light, for the most part, probably works okay, but depending on the timing, it could lead to the favor of a particular municipality. And so when it becomes evident that something isn't exactly 100%, the red lights have to disappear because newspaper stories are then run and about how unfair things might be. That a picture was snapped before it really should have been snapped.
I noticed that it'll snap too when there's not anybody running the red light. Is that a defect, or is it taking pictures
I really couldn't say because I had no expertise in that other than
you guys. Has nothing to do with those tickets.
No, we didn't want to be involved in any of that. But I would say periodically an image would be taken just to make sure the cameras are working, and that would be the only reason.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you always see in some of these, on TV reports and stuff, news, where the classic picture of the driver, and all you see some crazy pictures of people. Anything you saw that was crazy, like a crazy picture of something?
Sure. Yeah. I could tell you about crazy pictures. Some of the crazy pictures would be drivers who would mug for the camera, knowing that they would mug, but we couldn't use those pictures, but we took them anyway. Now, we would typically take 4 pictures, 4 in the front, 2 in the back, and we would pick the best. But if an image of the driver or a passenger were in the image, we couldn't use it potentially for violations. But we had motorcycles that were equipped with transponders. And they would typically have a passenger or not have a passenger, and when that motorcycle went through the lane, you would see an arm go behind and covering the license plate with manually, so as not to be targeted as a violator. So we saw manual, attempts at that. We also saw, and I think I mentioned this earlier, attempts to use electrical masking tape to modify the license plate. So we had some license plate modifications, stolen license plates to be used in vehicles. And so occasionally we would do queries against license plates to make sure that anything reported as lost or stolen wasn't part of it. So we would make sure that ultimately the privacy of people would be respected, and that we didn't pursue somebody who really didn't do anything wrong other than inadvertently doing something. Now, what we did see was some of the people who purposely run up tens of thousands of dollars in violations, thinking that they wouldn't be pursued. And for the most part, those were commercial vehicles. where either the driver on his or her own decided they weren't about to pay the toll, and keep the money themselves, because at $26 a pop, depending on how many tolls you went through, that quite a bit of chump change you wind up with.
I'm also getting a vision of the New York City George Washington Bridge commuters are going to be a lot different than your Orlando metropolitan area commuters. Is there a difference in geography and some of these?
Yeah, there's a difference in hand gestures. There's a difference in speed. There's a difference in people willing to sign up or not willing to sign up, and the reasons why they're either willing to sign up or not willing to sign up. There are economic differences between various parts of the country. We had to take that into account as well. So when we were trying to sell the technology, we initially had a higher level for an account opening, and we continued to lower that until we got it to a point where we felt that most people could afford it. But we also knew there were people that really couldn't afford it, and they had to pay on a per-going basis, the manual transactions. So we took that into account. They weren't bad people. They just simply didn't have the funds to really set up an account ahead of time.
And so
or they didn't have a banking affiliation.
Well, I was going to say, okay, you kind of need a debit card or a credit card, but what if you didn't want that?
Exactly.
Because a lot of them are going all tollless. I mean,
we found people that didn't have any banking relationships at all.
Right.
How could they possibly have an Easy Pass account?
Right.
Well, we found out that we then began to offer anonymous accounts. I won't get into the details of the anonymous account, but basically, we didn't care who you are. We didn't care where you come from. Is there money in the account? And is the account valid or not valid? There were also court cases, divorce cases, where they try to use the Easy Pass technology to prove that either husband or wife was misbehaving. And so we had to develop protocols and procedures to make sure that we didn't provide that evidence to attorneys who were involved in non-criminal activity pursuits. So
because it's not public.
No. No. So we absolutely shied away from personal type of things, and only allowed the records for a bona fide subpoena, or a judge, or a court to pursue. You'd be amazed how many attorneys would look for vehicles to track a client or a non-client.
Now, I know some people are concerned about like the Big Brother aspect of the government and stuff. Is this a real viable way that the federal government could kind of get much information on you? I mean, it's taking some pictures.
Yeah, well, I'm out of the technology, but that was one of the biggest concerns that we had in selling this to the public, the Big Brother aspect of it. You didn't have to be concerned about Easy Pass. You need to be concerned about the construction of the vehicle itself, because the construction of the vehicle, it has component parts in it that can be tracked. And so,
I believe they have now all new cars are mandatory where they have a kill switch too.
Exactly. So you don't need the technology anymore, the Easy Pass technology, to be able to track a vehicle, to kill a vehicle by way of a kill switch. That's built into the vehicle itself. I forgot what the specification is, but there's a certain specification. That basically, it was developed not for Big Brother to be able to track you. At least that's the official terminology. It was developed for collision avoidance. So, for instance, if you have 1,000 vehicles going through a roadway, Big Brother, which doesn't exist, would want other drivers in that long lane of cars to be aware that there's some activity somewhere, that they should slow down, that they should be careful. And so they could send a message to those cars, either by way of audio or visual, that some activity is going on. Also, if there's a police chase in progress, for other drivers to be warned about that kind of an event. Now, Easy Pass doesn't do that. And we purposely don't do that because we wanted to avoid that Big Brother aspect of it. But the vehicle manufacturers have the ability, if they've already done it, I wouldn't know, I've been out of the game for a long time, to actually build those into the vehicles themselves for mass evacuation events, collision avoidance, and accidents.
Is that how apps like, Google Maps and Waze and things, are they getting data that way, or is that?
Yes.
Yes. So they're kind of integrated into this data.
And also through loops that are embedded in roadways.
Oh, wow. So it's not just your physical phone location and
Correct.
GPS speed.
Correct.
It's actually...
Yeah, you would know if a roadway has a loop in it or not. Quite a number of roadways do. And loops tell you what kind of vehicles are there, what the speed is of the...
What is a loop?
If I remember my background correctly, it's basically a wire that's sunk down about 4 inches below grade level, covered over by Bondo, which is what we used to use. Bondo, believe it or not, is a very resilient, multifaceted way of covering something up. And the loops would then be connected to an electronic device that would capture speed, that would capture the number of axles that a vehicle has, and that type of thing, and also measure volume against the roadway.
It's kind of like the ones that they temporarily put over the road with the box.
No, I'm not talking about that.
Oh, okay.
Right.
This is something more integrated.
But think of that as being more permanent,
right,
where those are actually embedded below the surface line and then covered over by, I call it Bondo. I don't know, maybe they're using a different vehicle, a different medium these days, but it worked very, very effectively.
Wow. And so who manages that data? Is that part of the Department of Transportation? Or?
I honestly couldn't tell you. I don't want to mislead anybody.
Sure.
But that's where the Big Brother comes in.
Yeah.
People are worried about, exactly your question. Well, who manages that? What do they do with the data?
Yeah.
And what is it that they're collecting? And what do they know about me in particular? I don't know. All I can say is, having been involved in Easy Pass technology, we had no interest in tracking people. Their lives, frankly, were not that interesting. Not that I would know one way or the other, except for the lawyers that wanted some records. But we avoided scrupulously the avoidance of any kind of intervention in people's private lives, because if a case went to court, the judge or the judges, believe it or not, would pursue that line of questioning. What is it used for? How is it used? How are you protecting it? How do I know no one is gaining access to that information?
Protecting people's rights, the core.
Right. So we had to develop procedures where only through legal subpoenas would information be handed out. And who would have access to that information, even if it weren't a subpoena? What about the average boy and girl that works in the technology behind the scenes? Did they have access to it? The answer is no. We would track anybody who attempted to access certain files, and certain files were restricted to people like only myself. So there was a whole hierarchy of who could look at what and under what circumstances. So I'll tell you a funny story. I think it's funny. This happened when I was no longer working on the George Washington Bridge. I was working at another facility in the state of New Jersey, where my office received. We were doing Easy Pass, but with a different facility, and we received information that a vehicle was spotted getting on the New Jersey Turnpike, and it had rifles in the vehicle that were quite visible.
Like in the rear window?
In the back.
In the back, yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right. And that information came from a customs official who happened to be on a road, who happened to spot a vehicle getting on, and basically a tripod. And it just so happened that evening, because it was in the evening hours, actually afternoon hours, but which turned into the evening, George Bush, the younger, was giving a speech in Manhattan. And the New Jersey Turnpike, the roads lead into Manhattan. So what is a vehicle with that kind of firepower doing on a road? Something isn't quite right. And so, because some people were under the impression that we know everything, we track everything, the people that operate that toll system, which I headed up at the time, we were notified about the incident. Some vehicle entered. Could we begin tracking that vehicle? And who does it belong to? Where's it going? How fast was it going? Do we have any images of who's in the vehicle, who's not in the vehicle? Because people are getting a little scared. And I'm trying to remember the sequence of events, but the way I came to find out about it was I would do walkabouts. I had my own office with a door, but I would go out into where my team was, and all of a sudden I noticed guys in suits and ties, usually dark suits and ties, which was a little bit unusual. And so I introduced myself to these guys, and I found out that they were police, detectives. And they had gotten the same word. And of course, they came to the group that were taking images, and they knew what the heck was going on. And two of the officers out of maybe a dozen that eventually showed up turned out to be Port Authority detectives. So I had a bit of a fond feeling for them. We eventually tracked the vehicle. We had to make some calls, and I had to call the vendor who was taking the images of the violators to say, who does the license plate belong to? Now, I'm working with the police. I'm aware that this is possibly a dangerous situation. I have no business finding out who the license plate belongs to. But the police are there. I figured, all right, I'm working alongside them. It's a common problem. It's a common challenge. Who does the car belong to? And I finally get a call back from the guy that I called who was representing the vendor. Just watch my language, but the story was, Walter, what the are you trying to do to me? You're trying to get me arrested and thrown in jail for the rest of my life? And I said, hey, take it easy. What's wrong? Well, you asked me to do you a favor. I thought it was a personal favor. But you got me into a big jam. What's the big jam? It turned out the vehicle was an FBI vehicle. And it turned out that that vehicle was heading to the site where George Bush the Younger was about to give his speech. Wow. And snipers were going to be set up on certain rooftops. And so I couldn't announce to the rest of the police officers.
Because it's a secret mission.
Because the FBI was there as well.
Yeah.
What the deal was, So I looked at the two Port Authority detectives and I motioned for them to kind of step outside. So I explained to them what the embarrassing situation was, because we had FBI that was part of the group that had assembled. I didn't want to embarrass the FBI. I didn't want to embarrass the law enforcement people that were there into thinking, this is a wild goose chase. What the hell are we doing? So I explained to them what was going on. They conferred with one another, and they eventually called it a night, and everybody went home happy.
You didn't tell them, say, guys, this is a little above your pay grade. It's on a need-to-know basis. You guys are dismissed.
Yeah, it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me to do. I wanted the police officers to handle it in a police manner, wherever that might have been, and they did. So
you kind of, like I said, inadvertently got yourself into a lot of exciting scenarios, it sounds like, over your career.
I would get a lot of calls from the FBI, state police, local police asking for information. And I would always tell them that a subpoena was needed. And then I would hear that it was a child abduction or something along those lines. And that would change the complexion of what I would do.
Sounds like then it took on a lot of purpose for you to do good as well.
Well, doing good it's a personal interpretation, but you couldn't do things by the book. You're supposed to do things by the book. There are procedures, processes in place. But eventually you come across a situation where the human factor comes in, and yeah, you could do things by the book. But when the human factor comes in and there's a murder involved, or the abduction of a child involved, then you have to kind of bend the rules a little bit to do the right thing.
Goes beyond your job description and then into your civil duty too.
And you have to live with yourself afterwards.
Yeah, wow, incredible.
And hope you don't get caught.
Yeah, well, sounds like you put your neck on the line in a lot of different ways, but I think everybody appreciates the work you've done with the Easy Pass. I mean, you made people's life a lot easier in a lot of ways, and you're the white hat of the Port Authority.
Well, sometimes it wasn't a white hat exactly.
Yeah,
it was multifaceted and multicolored, but in the end, you hope it was more white than it was black. In the end, but. So for those toll collectors that had to retire and were offered other positions, I'm sorry. That wasn't my intent.
It's a dangerous job anyways. I mean, you hear those stories of people getting ran over and stuff and brake dust and whatnot. So I think you probably did them a service too.
You know, you raise a good point. We had situations where field trucks, the driver would fall asleep, literally plow into a toll plaza. Toll plaza would catch on fire. The driver and the toll collectors would would perish as a result of the fire. Yet instances where, and I have pictures of this somewhere in my house records, two vehicles fighting with one another for dominance. Who's going to be the first to enter the toll plaza? And both vehicles jamming one another and winding up in an accident, being overturned inside of a single toll plaza. The things that some people would do could just be incredible. But yeah, people would get killed. All you had to do was, cross over the road. And so one of the things that these toll plazas have are underground passages where a toll collector doesn't have to cross the lane. They get into the stairwell leading to the underground, and the exit would be solely by underground, because you can't control drivers. You don't know if someone's sleeping, if someone is talking, and just simply not paying attention.
Well, there was I remember the clip in the news not too long ago. I think it was at the Canadian border, where sports car or
Yes.
some, it just
Yeah.
exploded in the air.
Exactly. At first, they thought that they might have been terrorists, but it turned out they were just
Just,
clowns.
yes.
There was just speeding, and that
There's a lot of them there.
that happens. Yeah, people get killed. Yeah. But, I don't want toll collectors to thank me. That wasn't the objective. The objective was to make their life easier. But as it turned out over time, and hopefully it worked out for everybody, everybody was able to retire or find another position that was better than what they were doing. And hopefully people are leading good lives.
Well, that's a good place to end it. Well, thank you, Mr. And
Thank
thanks
you.
for sharing your stories. And I hope you're enjoying your retirement and you're not getting too many calls to do any more of these
But
kinds of.
calls have stopped.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, sir.
Now, you're going to mask my name, or how's this going to work?
We could beep it out. I could even blurry your face out if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, maybe I'll do.
That's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.
I go by the pseudonym of Benny or Gurkus.
Benny the
Yes.
Okay, we could do that.
All right.
And I'll give it to you before.
Yeah, we're good.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Was it fun?
You want any more? Not today, but
No.
you got World Trade attack stories. I was in the building when that happened.
Oh yeah. Do you want to do it now?
No, I'm
Yeah, come back anytime.
I got to get it.
Anytime.
I'll talk to you. I'll call
Yeah.
you.